Hello and welcome back to the ROKER RAPPORT Extra podcast. You join us after 2 wins, so most of us are in a far cheerier mood heading into Saturday's away game at Sincil Bank, Lincolnshire. It's our first visit since the Peter Reid days, I believe, if that's correct. And to chat all things Lincoln City, we've got Michael Hortin of BBC Radio Lincolnshire. How are you doing, Michael? Are you well?
Very good, thank you.
Good. Now, I'll kick straight away. Obviously, you've just been promoted, but it's been a bit of a topsy-turvy return to League One for the Imps, to be honest. How would you sum up the first 2 months of the season?
I think if you'd asked me that question after 4 games, I would have been like on seventh heaven, on cloud nine, all those sorts of things, because it was an incredible to come up. And most of us, well, certainly I was a realist, some might say a pessimist. I was thinking mid-table, so lower mid-table will be a good return to League One, a division we haven't been for more than 20 years. And then we've had a lot of, you might say, reality biting, just 1 win in the last 11 games in League and Cup. And I would say it's been a rocky return to League One. Obviously, a big part of that is with the management team moving on as well.
Yeah, because when I did my own League One preview, I think I took you to be 10th, but I said, don't be surprised if, you end up going there or thereabouts to playoffs, because I think onward momentum can be so huge. And did you feel that onward momentum of the promotion and of, Danny Cowley being head of the club? Did you feel that momentum from pre-season?
Yeah, I think it's been beyond pre-season. It's been 3 years of momentum. You have to remember, we had gates when the Cowleys came in of about 2,500, 3,000. We now have more than 6,000 season ticket holders. We've had 2 promotions in 3 years. The other year, we got to the Checker Trade final and beat Shrewsbury, who are at a high level, to win our first ever appearance at Wembley. So the momentum was absolutely there. I think it still is there. It's waned a little bit. It inevitably will, but I think that does make such a difference. And I've no doubts that the first 4 games were benefiting from that onward momentum and players coming in and thinking, well, we're just joining something that always goes forward. And now a lot of these players have suddenly realised they've got to help it go forward.
Yeah, no, very much so. Now, obviously, Danny Cowley has left. They've gone to Huddersfield. But what I was quite interested in is the rise of Lincoln, really, because as you said, it's been quite a big upward trajectory. How did it begin, and how did it sow its seeds of success, shall we say?
I think you'd have to go all the way a bit further than Danny and Nicky Cowley. The board was always struggling to get finance in. The same, I know, at a lot of football clubs, but Lincoln being a little bit out on a limb where it is, and I'm sure you'd say the same, perhaps that where you are as well, but certainly Lincoln would view itself as a little bit out on the limb, struggled to get investment in, and it was in truth a club that hadn't come to terms with being relegated out in the Football League. Even 4 or 5 years on, it was still in mourning. There was still recriminations going on about ifs, whens and whys, about why the team had gone out of the Football League. And so into this comes Clive Nates, who is I wouldn't say shy, but he's not somebody who goes and seeks the limelight too much. But he came in from South Africa as an investor. Now, it was a bizarre route for him because he's actually an Everton fan. And you may recall there was a bit of a trend about 15 years ago about the idea of feeder clubs. And there was a suggestion at one stage that Lincoln might become a feeder club to Everton. He's an Everton fan, took an interest in Lincoln. That stayed with him for those, 10, 15 years or so. And then eventually he became an investor in Lincoln. But he's driven more and more investment into Lincoln financially. Big money for Lincoln, not big money for teams perhaps in the Championship and in the Premier League. That's given them a basis. And then the previous manager stood down with about a month and a half to go in the football season, Chris Moyes, which gave the board about 6 to 8 weeks without a rush, end of season. Lincoln weren't getting relegated, weren't getting promoted, and they brought the Cowleys in. And I think what the Cowleys saw in Lincoln is all the things that many of us have always said. Lincoln is out on its own, which means that there's a lot of potential to become, not as big as Norwich and Ipswich, but have that sort of pull of being the centre of a county. I mean, Lincoln do have the competition, obviously, of Scunthorpe and of Grimsby, whereas Norwich and Ipswich don't really have that. But there was always a feel that Lincoln could be more than the sum of its parts. And I think the Cowleys just came in at the right time. They had good investment. Should never be hidden that there was good finance there. But they also had a way of connecting with fans of whatever age and whatever gender.
With you mentioned connection, and I think that's been a huge thing at Sunderland over the past few years, despite the fact that inevitably we failed to have any success in terms of like actually winning things. Did that connection just come from the management team, or did it also come from sort of the higher echelons? How did those, we talked about it off air in terms of how many fans now go to Lincoln, and for those who don't know, you pack the place out now, which is different to previous, and that is always about fan engagement and success. So away from the success, how was the engagement? How did that sort of begin? Where did that come from?
I mean, Danny went to play. If you invited, in the early days, in the first year, if you invited Danny to a fete, he'd go to that fete. He'd go to a lot of events. He was also one, and I'm sure that you might have seen on television in the last few weeks with Huddersfield as well. Danny is a big one for not just applauding the fans who've travelled away from home, but going across and engaging with them. And I remember, and I know this was a bit later on in the story, but the last game in the conference in the National League was away at Southport. Danny spent an hour and a half walking around the fans, shaking hands, talking to every single fan, doing selfies. When Lincoln played away against Everton in the Cup last season, he suddenly turns up in the middle of Liverpool at some bars where the Lincoln City fans were, and just engaged with them. So look, a lot of it can't be stressed enough came from Danny, but everyone else got aboard the train. His brother Nicky, of course, but directors, are very good at going and engaging with different fan groups and making sure that they feel part of the story. And this is what's sort of, we've seen a growth in the 617 Squadron, which is a group of fans who, are the ones that go, your fans that go on Saturday, they'll be the fans you'll notice. They'll be away to your right, just at the top, and they'll start singing 5 minutes before the game, and they'll finish afterwards. And they did that when Lincoln was 6-0 down against Oxford. They just, they've absolutely bought into it. But then we've got other groups like a Lady Imps group that suddenly sprouted in the last 2 or 3 years and have gone from strength to strength. And all of that has come from that engagement, largely Danny, but the board as well, and the players of going out and being part of their community.
I did very much notice you mentioned the ladies group as well, and there is a ladies group that's all about engaging sort of young women, I think, if I could be wrong with this, and getting them to see both Lincoln ladies and also Lincoln City as well. So it really has expanded across all over the shop, basically. Then there is a much more engagement. I mean, it's when I'm personally searching for someone to be the guest, obviously putting Lincoln City, there was a lot more results for fan-based things than there was sort of maybe with other clubs. Fleetwood, I'm having a nightmare with at the moment, but Lincoln wasn't so much of a problem.
No, I mean, and I can actually, the Lady Imps, the person who helped found it is a personal friend of mine. And if I tell a little bit of her story, and she'll sigh if she hears this, because I do it quite often, but I think actually it shows you what's happened at Lincoln, in the sense that Maria's got a son who's now just turned 16, so he'd have been about 12 or 13, and he used to go to games, not all the time, but reasonably often Joe would go to Lincoln City games. And Maria, for some reason, she went to a Lincoln game, and it was like her life changed, genuinely. She became a huge Lincoln fan. Matt Reed was her favourite player. It wasn't, the normal people that people pick out as a favourite fans player. And Maria changed her career and is now working within football, basically, not at Lincoln City, but elsewhere, working within football. And that's all happened in the last 3 years. And that's all happened as the result of that. They set up the Lady Imps group. And actually what it was trying to do is that there's a women felt like they wanted to go to the game but didn't feel comfortable going on their own. And so what they tried to do is, so whatever your age, from 70 down to 20, and we had people coming on the radio station saying, I'm in my 70s, I've always wanted to go to Sincil Bank, and the Lady Imps would say, well, come with us. And that's those little bits have all added together.
And do the club do any sort of like fan initiatives to get maybe cheaper tickets or anything like that, or group together tickets? Do you also go to that extent?
They do a little bit, but to be blunt, they haven't had to. They've suddenly, when you think Sincil Bank is around the 10,000 mark, and I'm trying to think of how many Sunderland we bring in, but you'll basically sell out what is the Stacey West end of the ground. So that's the north end of the ground, named after the two Lincoln fans who died in the fire at Bradford, hence Stacey West. And off the top of my head, I think it's about 2,000, just under maybe, something like that.
Something along that line, yeah, 1,008, I think.
That will sell out for Sunderland fans, and that's the first time, apart from Everton in the Cup, that's sold out this season. And then you've got to find room for 6,000 season ticket holders, and the ground only holds 10,000. So you can see very quickly tickets are becoming at a premium. And I know of people who've asked the favour of me, oh, can I get a ticket for the Sunderland game? And the answer has been, yeah, good luck.
Onto the team itself. We touched before. I think I mentioned it was a topsy-turvy beginning to the season, but I think from the outside looking in, obviously the Cowley Brothers are a huge loss. I think in terms of league games, you've lost 4 of the last 5. Did the players look a little bit shell-shocked? Is that what it is?
No, I think it's a lot of things. You're always you don't want to just feel like you're criticising when somebody's left the football club. And so I would say this if Danny and Nicky were still here, but the squad always felt to us a little bit imbalanced. If you look at the squad now, they've got I think 3 players or maybe even 4 who could play in the 10 role. They've only got 2 strikers in Akinde and Tyler Walker. And they've only got 3 recognised centre halves. So it kind of feels a little bit of an imbalanced squad. Now, that's not the sole reason, why the results haven't gone their way. And the only thing I would say is that the results, if you look at when the Cowleys left, which was after the game away against Wickham, the results had already been going badly from then. So there's clearly a lot going on. I think the brutal reality is that either consciously or subconsciously, the players knew that Danny and Nicky were probably going to be going quite soon. I think that's inevitable. And then I just think also it's that step up in standard, and quite a few of the players that they've brought through, I think, have done well. If you look at Tyler Walker, great, 5 goals, but it's still I know he's come from the Championship where he's played with Forest, but his long-term playing has been at Mansfield, who are in League 2. So he's obviously stepped up to some extent with League 1. He's done well. But that's the same for a lot of the players. They've had to step up in class or come out of the Premier League teams and their youth teams and suddenly play men's football. And that's a step up in itself. So Joe Morrell, for example, has come from Bristol City playing central midfield. I'd argue probably close to being the player of the season so far. A really good, moves the ball really quickly, nicely in midfield if he's on his game. But he's had a bit of a stop-start time. He went away on international duty for the first time playing for Wales. And so I think they've struggled to establish what they need to be doing. And it's going to, we'll come on to Appleton, but I think it's going to take a while longer before Lincoln truly find their feet.
We've touched on a couple of summer signings already. Tyler Walker being the big one. I think George Grant, although he's been out with the side recently, had a very, very good start. You touched on Joe Morrell, but there's also Jack Payne there. I thought from the outside again, looking in, that Lincoln's summer business was actually really good for a team that had just come up. But how was it translated on the pitch as opposed to paper?
If you'd have said to me, I think it was about a week before the end of the transfer window, maybe a few days less, how was the transfer window? All I'd say is we've only got Johnny Kinde as a striker. And Johnny Kinde is not, he got close to 20 in the promotion year, but he's not the sort of striker who's going to create lots of stuff around him. He's just not that sort of player. And I said we needed Tyler Walker, and hey presto, Tyler Walker, after Danny had a moan at the board about finance, Tyler Walker comes through the door, and however much of the money that Lincoln are paying and Nottingham Forest are paying, he has been fantastic. He's been everything that Lincoln would want. We just need to get consistent feeding of the ball into the box for him. He doesn't get enough off the ball for me, and I know that's something that Michael Appleton has talked about. Jack Payne, a good signing, but he can float out of games. He started the season very strong. George Grant, good player. Can he do it consistently? That would be my question once again about George Grant. And then you've also got players that are still in the squad from the promotion years, and Bruno Andrade, who for me is, I'm staggered nobody in the Championship's come looking for him. He does have his off days, but I just think he's got everything that you want in a modern attacking winger. And then Harry Anderson, who's probably to some extent the fans' favourite, because he's been at the club. He's the longest serving player, probably still one of the younger players at the club, but he's a bit like the Roadrunner. You knock him down, he gets back up and keeps going, and he keeps going, and he keeps going. So they have some very exciting attacking players. They've just haven't quite found the blend and haven't consistently got the ball into the box enough, probably as well. Although they did all right last night against Manchester United under 21s, even though they lost. They just didn't take their chances that day. But Tyler wasn't playing, so I think those sort of games you have to sort of count off on your own, don't you? It's nice to get to a cup final, but it doesn't really tell you much about the team as a whole.
No, very much so. When it comes to yesterday's result, I think it was quite a changed team as well, wasn't it? You mentioned Tyler Walker wasn't playing, but I think it was, shall we say, not an understrength team, but it was mixed up with players that maybe haven't played in the past few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was. Managers never like you saying it's the B team because they don't want players to think they're in the B team, but it was players that are on the fringe who haven't had many games, who frankly you wouldn't expect to get many games if everyone stays fit up to Christmas. I mean, after Christmas, you'd expect Michael Appleton will make quite a few changes and try and put his imprint on the squad. But at the moment, he's got to, like all managers, go with what he's got for the next couple of months.
Talking about obviously him putting his stamp on the squad, I suppose before I go on to the question I wanted to ask, Michael Appleton, I think, was quite a solid appointment. I think it's going to be difficult to replace the Cowley Brothers and Danny Cowley in particular. But what did the fans and you yourself think of the appointment of Michael Appleton? Would you have preferred somebody else, or were you quite happy with him?
He was one of the names in the frame. There was a lot of others that were there. You know what it's like. Sometimes people claim to have been interviewed or claim to be approached, and maybe it's not quite the situation. Personally, once I'd done my research, I was aware of Michael Appleton, but you don't do too much research unless you think you're coming to your club or it's part of your job to know about them. And so I would say that when I knew the name, I knew he'd done well at Oxford, and I thought, well, that's a good sign. And then when I went and listened to a couple of podcasts and I read a few interviews and articles that he'd written and those sorts of things, I think I think solid is probably about the right word, is the right person to come in now. He still does the fan engagement. I should say as well, there's probably an outside perception, and I saw it on Quest's programme on last Saturday, and they talked about it's still Danny Cowley's Lincoln City or something, and that's not where Lincoln City fans are. Without going into too much, the way Danny and Nicky left the club have left some fans underwhelmed and a bit disappointed at how it all happened. They're always going to be disappointed when somebody successful leaves, of course, but it could have worked out differently, and there wouldn't have been, for some people, frankly, a bad taste in the mouth about how they left. Personally, I haven't, but I think that a lot of people have. And therefore, I don't think Michael Appleton has quite of course, they always say never follow the successful person. But I think in some ways, Michael Appleton's, he won't perhaps know this, but his way into Lincoln City is not so much, oh, Danny did it this way, Danny did it that way. I don't think he'll get quite as much of that as he may have done if the way that Danny and Nicky had moved on had worked out differently.
I didn't have this question wrote down, but I suppose it does make me think. With Danny Cowley's move to Huddersfield, were you surprised that he went to Huddersfield? Because I kind of was. I thought maybe a club on a more of an upward trajectory would have been more of his appointment.
Yes, so I kind of, from where are we now? May, June last year, I felt things changed at Lincoln City, and I felt that them moving on was coming sooner rather than later. And then there was speculation about clubs like West Brom. I think Middlesbrough was one of the clubs was linked with Danny and Nicky, and some were nearer the truth in terms of how much interest there was than others. And then there were two clubs that came up: Sheffield Wednesday and Huddersfield. So Sheffield Wednesday, the bits I've read about the chairman, I put it he's a colourful character. That's just not Danny and Nicky. That's not, they want super safe, really solid foundations at a football club. And clearly Huddersfield have worked very hard in terms of financially what they're offering Danny and Nicky in terms of pay, but also, as I understand it, when Danny and Nicky were going to Huddersfield, or were offered Huddersfield initially, Danny would have been first team coach or something like that. Danny's a manager. He wants to be involved in as much as he can at a football club. So I could never have seen that happening. But as soon as you started to see that Huddersfield were working hard to get Danny and Nicky to the club, I think they were always going to go. I just think it's a bad time for a club to lose their manager in September when you've only had a month with the players they've recruited.
On the sort of, should I say, back to Michael Appleton, he's only been there 10 days, so I don't know whether this is even a question that can be asked, but do you see any differences? Do you put any stamp on of his style on the team?
Well, actually, surprisingly, yes. And I've only interviewed him twice. I didn't do his news conference when he came to the club. I was off at the time. My first news conference, my first interview with him was both before and after the Blackpool game last Friday. And he made a point, and then he clarified it a little bit when he talked on Quest on the Saturday as well, about the need to get some young players into the Lincoln squad and some vibrancy. And if you go and look at the average age of Lincoln City, I think I'm right in saying they're the oldest average age squad in League One at the moment. And I think some people misinterpreted and thought he was talking about all players, all the older players. I don't want all old players. It wasn't so much that. He just felt Lincoln needed a bit more dynamism going forward, and maybe to not take as much time as to get the ball in the box. And so I think what we'll see is that we'll see some of these younger players, certainly, well, possibly in January, but certainly next summer, coming in. I imagine his knowledge as a coach in youth team football and under 23s football will come to the fore with that, because it certainly did when he was at Oxford. Then I would imagine there's quite a few of the Lincoln more senior players are on 1-year contracts or in the last year of their contract. And I would imagine, just as football changes, that those players who've been fantastic for the Imps, by the way, and I wouldn't say anything other than they have been great for the Imps, but I imagine they would be moving on. So if you were looking at the Lincoln squad in a year's time, I think the average age will be down a couple of years at least.
In terms of performances, you touched on the Blackpool game there as well. Appleton's first game was a 6-0 home defeat at Oxford, but he was there about a day. I don't even know if he was actually in charge, just based on when he joined. But Blackpool done quite well this season. Yes, it was a defeat, and a defeat is a defeat is a defeat, but there's a big difference between a 6-0 home defeat and a 2-1 away defeat. Could you see sort of shoots of recovery after a few difficult performances in the Blackpool game?
So I should be fair to Michael. You're right to stand on the edge on the Oxford game. It wasn't his. He was just in the crowd. So it was still in the record books. It would always be Jamie McCombs who was the stand-in manager. So if you'd asked me after 20 minutes had I seen the difference of Blackpool, I would be like, no, we've already conceded 2. But I was really impressed by the players, because actually it kind of felt like they drew a line. And I would give credit to the fans. And you know what it's like when you get a really vocal away support, and Lincoln's tends to be most of the time, but I thought they were particularly good away at Blackpool, and they almost it felt like they almost gave the Lincoln players a push forward, but also like, you can't go any back any further. We're going to go forward, and I thought there was a lot to commend them for coming back in the game. Of course, if you give somebody 2-0 lead away from home to come back and get something out of the game, you're going to have to play, well and above and beyond. And they nearly got a chance right at the end with Tyler Walker. But I thought there were lots of pluses to come out of the last 70 minutes. But I'm a great believer in you can only judge a game on one thing, well, mostly on one thing, and that's the results. And at the end of the day, it was another defeat.
So moving on to Saturday's game, obviously we're in decent form, maybe not as much as maybe not the form we want to be in. We'd rather be controlling game start to finish. Sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're winning, but we're hanging on towards the end. But how are Lincoln fans, shall we say, and the team potentially viewing Saturday's game? Is it winnable?
Well, first, I think there's a degree of excitement. I don't know how you define biggest league games. It's one of the biggest league games for me in quite a while at the football club. Of course, there are those games that meant you get promoted, and they're always bigger, if you know what I mean. But if you want to say a run-of-the-mill game, how big does it feel? It feels, big for Lincoln fans. It's presumably the Sunderland fans are going to come and make a noise, which not all away fans do, as you know. But whenever I've seen Sunderland fans come, they're always, very vocal, and that will suit Lincoln as the ground down to the ground. I think it's a really good atmospheric ground, and as I mentioned, the 6 and 7 will make plenty of noise, and I'm sure we'll be looking forward with the rest of the fans to having a good away following who are going to be very vocal, and I think that could probably help Lincoln. Maybe I'm clutching at straws a little bit, but I think maybe a big match atmosphere, which is what it will feel like, will help them, and hopefully they can get something from the game. But the run of games they've got coming up off the top of my head, I know Portsmouth are struggling at the moment, but Sunderland, Portsmouth, Peterborough, Ipswich, I think are at the next 4 games for Lincoln, which feels like we're going to certainly know a lot more about the team at the end of this month.
Yeah, I think that is probably quite a big month for Lincoln coming up, because you've gone from people thinking promotion hopefuls to all of a sudden you've hit relegation form, sitting in the middle because of that. But I think what would success be for Lincoln this season?
Oh, for me, I would take survival. Full stop. I'd have said that to you at the start of the season. I'll be honest. I hold my hand up, and I'd have said after 4 games, "Oh, maybe we can make the playoffs." You wouldn't be human if you hadn't started thinking that. But genuinely, I would take Lincoln surviving, because last time they came up into this league, they went down at the first time of asking. And I'll come back to Clive Nates as a chairman. Who's become the chairman, who was the investor, has now become the chairman of the club. Is that they're looking to get more and more investment into the club. Once again, of course, they might get the investor with huge amounts beyond everything, but they're trying to get consistent amounts of investment in. And Lincoln's objective, it's never been said to me in terms of years, but I would have thought Michael Appleton's got a 3.5 year contract. I would have thought that Lincoln, within 2 years, maybe would like to be 2.5 years in the Championship. That's the ambition for the club, which is a big ambition. Let's not forget that it's a long time since Lincoln were in what was the Championship, and don't even ask. I think we're back in the 50s now. But that is their ambition, and then they want to build from there again. It's certainly not a case that the story has stopped with the Cowleys. They gave it a fantastic lift off, and now it's up to Michael Appleton to take it on to the next level. And I, for one, feel that in some ways maybe it will in the long term work out well for Lincoln that Michael Appleton's somebody that knows this level of football better than the Cowleys, and maybe can get the right sort of players to take the Imps forward.
And if there's ever a blueprint for a team generally seen as a smaller team or a League One team or whatever it may be, getting to the promised land, you just got to look at Bournemouth, who are a very well-run club, play football in the cliched correct way, and had a meteoric rise, but have stuck there as well, aren't they? I suppose teams like Bournemouth are, for clubs like Lincoln, very much a club to admire and to aspire to be like.
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, number one, they prove that it's not about the size of your crowds, because I think Lincoln are talking about a minor expansion of the ground for next season, which, if it happens, would take it beyond the size of the ground at Bournemouth. So, size of ground is not the issue. If you had Clive on here, I'm sure he would just say that yes, it's an ambition, absolutely, to match a Bournemouth. Why not? They feel it's that moment in history that Lincoln City can have, and why can't they be the team that do it? But the brutal truth is, and we all know this, is they could just do with a Russian billionaire to come and help them along.
Yes, we could actually come to think of it. An American one, whoever, any will do. Any will do. So we touched about it sort of off air before, but memories of Sunderland, either at home or away, we both struggled a little bit, didn't we?
Absolutely, and you helped me out with the name. I can only, and I've been commentating, covering the Imps since 99, so that's 20 years. And I stand to be corrected. There wouldn't have been a league game before now, of course.
No.
And the only cup game I can think of was a 1-0 win in the FA Cup third round. And I'm not going to claim credit for this because you told me it was Grant McCann who scored the goal. And all I remember, I've got a funny feeling for some reason I wasn't commentating that day. Or if I was, I wasn't doing it in quite the way I was doing it now, because I remember going around to the bar, and they have like a fan zone around the back of one of the stands, which I should say, if Sunderland fans are going, it's well worth getting along to. It's good food there, and it's a nice way to get a bit more out of your game. But they didn't have that in those days. They just had the bar. And I really remember it being absolutely rammed, and I'm sure there were fans of both sides in there. And that was my abiding memory. But I don't remember much about the game. I think you were Premier League at the time, I think.
We were. It was so for the record, it was 98 and 99. It was the third round of the FA Cup on the 2nd of January. We were actually Championship at that point, or Nationwide Division League 1 as it was. But it was our 105-point season. So to have a look at our substitute bench that day, you had Andy Marriott, Gavin McCann, who obviously scored, came on and also had an England cap, Martin Smith, one of the favourite sons of Sunderland, Michael Bridges, who obviously went on to score 20-plus goals for Leeds the season afterwards, and of course, last but not least, Kevin Phillips.
Yeah, and that would explain it as well, because You can tell I haven't done my prep yet for Saturday, but that was just before I took over doing commentary, and so that would explain why I was in the bar rather than working that day, because I would have been watching it as a fan that day, or certainly not commentating, just reporting. So yeah, no. So some memories. I remember it was pretty cold as well, but that's about it. Not much else.
Rejigging my memory, actually, reading just through the squad there, Kevin Phillips was on the bench that day after being injured for 4 months with a toe injury, funnily enough. I remember, was on the bench that game, didn't come on, played the next week against QPR, scored with his first touch, and the rest, in terms of Kevin Phillips' history, was within the England squad within 2 months, I think, after that, and he was championship level. So, bit of random trivia there for if anyone cares about my Wikipedia-esque mind of Sunderland Football Club. One big thing for me as well, I always find this quite interesting from an opposition perspective. I always pick 3 players from the opposition team that I think Sunderland should be wary of, but I think it's quite interesting the other way around. Because often you hear players you don't expect. There's always one that remains the same. But if you were to look after sort of up to 3, shall we say, doesn't have to be, but up to 3 players that you think could damage Lincoln on Saturday, which ones would you go for from our side?
Oh, I can't think. You've got me there. I can't even off the top of my head. I'd have to have the names in front of me. I just think I'm going to cop out slightly and say you seem to have gone from lots of 1-1s to suddenly getting a few wins.
2 1s,
so
3 1s.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to cop out. I'm not really good on this. I can't think of any.
Well, McGeady's injured.
Yeah.
So McGeady's the go-to, but I believe he's injured. Well, he certainly was last weekend. Outside of that, the likes of Maguire's on form at the moment, but I think for me, for Lincoln's side, I went for Tyler Walker, of course, George Grant, and I think I put John Akinde in there as well, even though they very rarely all play together, I don't think. But Jack Payne's obviously a good player.
If he plays, I'd throw one player to watch out for. In an attacking sense, would be Bruno Andrade. He came up. He was in the QPR youth team with Raheem Sterling. So that phrase, he's a friend of Raheem's, I don't know how absolutely accurate that is, but he's certainly saying through the same. Then he sort of drifted away, and Lincoln got him from Boreham Wood after Boreham Wood had just missed out on promotion in the playoffs 2 seasons ago, and he's made the jump up, and I think he's certainly got championship football in him at the very least. So I wouldn't be surprised if he moved. I thought he might have moved on this summer, to be honest. He was probably Lincoln's best attacking player last season. And when he's on his game, and he's pretty hard to stop for me. He's got that little bit of extra quality. And then the other player to watch out for he's not a player that catches the eye, but I just think he had a season on loan from Bristol City at Cheltenham. And then he's obviously now with us. That's Joe Morrell, who's become a Welsh international since moving to Lincoln. And he's just a 2-touch footballer for me in midfield, which I like to see. I like a player that receives the ball and moves it on nice and quickly, rather than faffs around in midfield, which I think too many teams have these days. And he just likes to keep the ball moving. And I suppose they would call him the water carrier to some extent, which I think would be a bit unfair. But he certainly keeps play moving, keeps it going forward.
So, final question, as I always ask, predictions for Saturday, if you're a prediction man.
It's normally me doing this. If a team's I can't not predict a Lincoln. I always get in trouble if I don't predict a Lincoln win. So I'll go. I'll go down the middle and be a coward and say I'll go for a 1-1 draw.
Oh, that would be.
I know.
For us, such a typical
to form, isn't it? Yeah,
it would just be a Jack Ross 1-1. I'm going to take a 1-0. We've only kept 1 clean sheet this season, none of them in the league. But I'm going to say we're going to repeat history of 20 years ago. We're going to win 1-0, and I'm going to go for. This is really going against my actual. This is my heart, not my head. But I'm going to say Will Grigg late 1-0 win. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will be a lot. If people think Lincoln are the Oxford United Lincoln, hopefully I'm not proved wrong on this. That's not the real Lincoln City. Lincoln if they're going to lose a game, it's going to be by the odd goal in a match for me. They're much better than the run they're on suggests, but they still need to prove that they're much better than that run, really. And and hopefully, if we're talking around, what is it? It's January the 4th, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
The return leg, which I already know a lot of Lincoln fans are looking forward to, just because it's obviously going to a huge stadium compared to, I can assure you, 3 years ago, the size of stadiums that we were going to. And, by January, I'd like to think we're talking about Lincoln in quite a different way to perhaps we're perceiving them at the moment.
And I feel you will. If I'm honest, I feel you'll be fine this season. I think there's nothing to worry about. But Michael, I really appreciate you coming on.
No worries.
Enjoy Saturday, but not too much. But thanks again as always. Appreciate it.